Hello, everyone. It's Doug Rogers. It's March 8th.
This is Russell Rogers. We're the Rogers team with Keller Williams Southlake. Let's talk DFW real estate. So, Doug, we heard some interesting news on the State of the Union last night and some possible legislation changes that might be affecting Texas homeowners. So, you want to kind of kick us off with that thought?
Yeah, we're going to put an emphasis on possible because we don't know for sure if this is going to happen or not. It's just been proposed. But two facets. One, we've all seen before, first-time home buyer credit. It's going to be somewhere around $10,000. They're going to try to work it out so it's around $400 a month for 2 years. And that's something we've seen before in 2008, and I've seen it back in the 80s and the 90s where things got slow, government comes up with a program, first-time home buyer geared toward just the first-time home buyer. But they added something new this time. This is what's interesting, is that they are going to give a $10,000 credit for sellers if the median of the sales price for that county is below the median. So a seller credit.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too because I believe it's geared toward basically like entry-level homes, right? Like the first-time home buyers, but not just the first time they're buying it or the seller selling it for a dollar amount. It's like really geared to the lower level, which we've talked about. You know, in 2022, 40% of all Texas houses or homes were bought by institutions, you know, investors, all the big companies that we all know about. And there's been a lot of hoopla and, negative conversation around that. And then now all of a sudden it's interesting that those same sellers might have the opportunity of getting $10,000 each on the back end. So I found that a little interesting and, interesting, especially this time of year with an election year.
Well, of course, one of the biggest homeowners in the country is BlackRock, the big equity company. Jeff Bezos has a group. There's just several of the monster investors out there, or the wealthy, super wealthy, that have these equity firms that own these companies that bought these houses. So I don't know if there's a role to play there or if it has anything going on there. But I will tell you what's interesting about they didn't say average, they said median. And if you really look at the statistics, there are a lot more homes under the average when you're talking about the median, because the median and the average are not the same thing. The average is much higher than the median, and the median, there's a lot of homes that fall into that category. And I think it's an interesting concept, but the question we have to face is, if they do this, is it going to increase home? How much will it increase inventory?
And that's their intent, right? And I just think it's funny that both sides of it are really geared towards sellers. So although the buyer would receive the credit, what that essentially means, if you've ever studied economics for everybody, is that it would actually increase prices because the buyers will buy more with it. And so all of that, both sides of the plan really go to sellers. So I do think that's interesting. Even though the buyer's getting the credit, they'll buy more with that credit knowing in mind. It's kind of like if you were going to go buy with you were going to use your credit card to buy a TV at Best Buy or something, but then you also had a gift card from somebody. You might not buy the same TV. You might go up a level because you are finding it to be like basically you're buying it for free. You're getting the upgrade for free. So it kind of helps sellers on both sides, although the buyers are getting it. And so I just wonder too if there's some politics around that with older populations owning more homes and that kind of thing, if it's trying to kind of get that side of the vote as well.
Well, besides us, if we do sell more homes, come out winners. But who else comes out a big winner in this? Are the banks. Because think about this, they're going to create this environment where we're going to sell more homes at 6.5% interest, 6% interest, 5.5% interest. And if they can get a bunch of people locked into buying homes, they know eventually the rates are going to go down and they'll be at 4%, 4.5%, 5%, and then they'll get to refi all those. So the banks come out winning in this scenario.
Yeah, that's true too, right? I mean, for anyone that didn't catch that, everyone owns a 2 to 3% interest rate right now, fixed rate for their houses. Not everybody, but most people, right? And so they're kind of locked into their houses like we've talked about before. And the banks would love nothing more, to Doug's point, is to write a bunch of new loans to get all those fees, but also at much higher interest rates. And well, I learned at UNT, we actually comprised or developed our own interest rates as a project in one of our finance classes. And interest rate risk is one of the 5 components of developing an interest rate from a bank. It's, the time and the maturity dates, the risk of the borrower, the interest rate risk of a macro perspective, and 2 others I can't think of now. I didn't go to that industry. So it is interesting. There's a lot of people that get helped by this, and I don't know if it's really the buyers getting helped at all, to be honest.
Well, they're just being thrown a bone. But the question is, if it weren't an election year, would this be happening?
And I mean, we still don't know if it's going to happen, so we'll see. But it's interesting that they have talked about this. I think from the first year that Biden was in office, actually, whenever we had a lot of the problems. Well, I guess it was 2020, and so 2020, the end of 2020, we heard some of this, and that's when that craze really started. Because remember, you and I talking about it, and you were like, "Hey, did you hear about this? They're going to give a credit to buyers for like $10,000." And at the meantime, I'm writing like 12 offers a client because we can't get under contract because there's so much demand. So I was like, that would be a terrible idea. But it's, the inflation was going up and everything like that. So I'm glad they didn't do it that year or try, but now they're doing it this year. So the timing is interesting.
Well, we could back ourselves into a situation where you have a buyer with a loaded gun, but they can't go anywhere. Because if we still have a short inventory and now we've got multiple offers again, like you just said, the seller doesn't care whether you're getting the tax credit or not. They want the highest and best price. And if you're in a FHA or VA loan, you can't offer above list price and waive the appraisal. That's against the rules. And now the seller will be back in the boat of saying, well, I'm going to take this guy because he's putting 30% down or 40% down. I want the guy with the biggest down payment who waived the appraisal, and I'll sell it to him because the risk is lower. That happens every day when you have multiple offers.
Yeah, and so, I mean, you've seen this before, but does the credit come at tax time the following year, or is there anything at the actual time of the deal?
Well, I've seen both of them. I've seen both deals where there was a credit at closing, and I've seen deals where it's a credit on your tax return.
And so we don't know what the outcome of the final bill will be or if it'll pass, like we said, but if it's at the time of the deal, I think it would be good for buyers in the sense that, like, for those that don't have a lot of the down payment or that are competing against those 30% down buyers, and maybe they are that first-time home buyer with only 3 to 5%, they could put that credit, depending on how it all looks in the end, toward that down payment or paying fees, and then therefore it offsets and they can put more down. So I think that would help them in that sense. But at the end of the day, they're still going to end up paying more for the house because it's a pumping demand, essentially.
Well, I'm under the impression if it's an income tax credit, you're lowering your taxable income by X amount. And I'll bet that it's $5,000 one year and $5,000 the next. Because if it's going to work out over a 2-year period, and it's a $10,000 tax credit, you actually have to pay taxes or have some sort of tax. Or you could get into a rebate situation where you've overpaid your taxes. But that's my view and guess as how it will come. But do I really believe it's going to happen? I don't know. It's a long way away from happening, but it's an election year.
I mean, I do appreciate the effort in trying to unlock some of the inventory, but I think it is skewed heavily toward the seller for what the reasons we just discussed. And I don't know if more sellers come into the market if that demand just doesn't get gobbled up, which kind of brings me to my next point, which I've got some buyers in Rockwall that we've talked about a little bit before, but these aren't the sellers that I had that listing for. It's a couple buyers that are a couple, and we have been looking, and the inventory is terrible in Rockwall. I mean, they're looking at 600,000 to 700,000, and have money, and it's not like they're looking at a $200,000 house and there's just no inventory. But there's really no good looking inventory to six to 700. Now they've got some time, but not enough time to do a new build. So I want to see what you have done in the past for that type of situation, or what you might recommend to them if that really hasn't come up too much in our time here in DFW. But what do you do when there's not enough inventory and you're looking and you got 4 months left?
Well, there's a lot of things you can try. One is you can look at the expired listings at the 700 to 750 range. And if there's anything that's workable there, dial the phone and say, hey, I'll do this deal. I'll represent the buyer. I'll take 3%. And, let's see, can you sell this home for $695, $685? And, something that's just right out of that level, or even maybe right at 700, because they failed. And now they know they're overpriced, but here's an opportunity. And, maybe you could create a rosy deal where they feel as though they're saving on their commission. They don't have to show it a bunch. One buyer, and maybe get a good lease back for 2 or 3 weeks to make it easier on them moving. And then offer to say, well, I'll help you buy another house. Find them a spot. And do the same thing now with the active listings in that 700 to 750 range. But you go into MLS and you put it as, I want to see all the houses that have been on the market in the 90 to 120 range. and then maybe the 60 to 90 range, and then back it down and see houses that are on the cusp of having a price reduction, because they're invisible right now. If you're typing into the computer 600 to 700, 701 is invisible. You don't see it. But if you're typing in 700 to 750, you can go into MLS and create a day range. How long has this house been on the market? Has it been on the market 90 days? Well, let's take a look at it and see if they might take an offer.
And we've done a lot of that, and I just wanted to see what your thoughts were too. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. And I was also thinking, like, if they could get a 550 that meets a lot of their conditions, like size, number of rooms, the type of rooms they want, but then maybe needs like a kitchen remodel, and then we work out a deal where maybe there's some cash back in the deal or seller credits, and then they can do that kitchen remodel on the backside and then have some overlap. And so instead of buying like a 650, they just move down in the price, and then they end up having some money left over to get that done, because there's some good houses there, but they haven't been updated in 20 years, and it's like they're nice neighborhoods with what they want, but they're just missing like one little thing, like the yard's too small, or the the kitchen needs to be remodeled, or the bathroom. And so it's like we're going to probably end up seeing both sides of it, like what you just said, go on the higher end and see if you can negotiate down, but also maybe go down and then just kind of keep some of that cash on hand to do those repairs, and then have some overlap.
There's some loans out there, some construction loans you could add on to that deal where, let's say you're buying the house for 550, but you're getting a loan based off of 600. Then they're putting 20% down off the 600, and then they put in escrow XYZ for the construction.
Yeah, so they might be doing something like that. So they still have several months left, but it's been pretty bad. Even the spec homes that we've looked at really weren't very good looking, and I don't know what's up with the water in Rockwall, but I don't think the agents really understand looking at comps, because a lot of the houses are priced way too high. I mean, we even went into one. It was like it's a new neighborhood where they're still finishing out the last few homes, but we went into one of the pre-owned homes that's like 5 or 6 years old, and it was like priced higher than that same exact model with all kind of more updates and like the newer finishes from being 6 years newer, and it's the same price, and you don't get any incentives from the builder, where they're taking money off or doing rate buy downs. So and I just see it time and time again in that area. So I think we need to go out there and just win all the listings, because I don't think people know how to price homes in Rockwall.
Well, it could be something in the water, like you said.
Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of what I was interested in, and seeing what your thoughts were. So it is interesting. We both kind of had different sides of the coin. And
yeah, I was thinking about a bigger commission, I guess, looking at the higher sales price. But I've just always found that people realize they've made a mistake, and they don't want to admit it. But if an opportunity comes along to cure their problem, then they can save face, because they may have had a realtor tell them for a month, they say, you're overpriced. And they say, no, I'll just take it off the market. And now here somebody comes along offering a lower price, and it's not going to get recorded in MLS. So they'll never have to tell anybody what they actually sold it for. So they can save face.
Definitely. And yeah, you're kind of giving them the life raft, essentially, to get out of that and move on with their lives, whatever they wanted to do. And yeah, unfortunately, the right one hasn't come along yet with even those conditions, but hopefully it will. And it's still early in the season, right? So hopefully we'll see some more listings come out. But why don't you run us through the numbers on listings?
I'll tell you, some interesting stuff is happening right now on the inventory. I'm going to start with Plano this time, because normally Plano adds, somewhere between 85 to 100 listings each week. This past week, Plano added 132 listings. Normally they put somewhere around 70 houses under contract each week. They put 85 houses under contract this week. Normally they have somewhere around 450 to 500 in listings. They're over 556 listings in Plano. So they exploded on the upside so far as the number of listings this past week. Where the other markets that we follow closely pretty much stayed the same and did the normal things. Grapevine, Colleyville, Keller Southlake, they added 34 listings in the last week. They put 35 under contract, and they've got a total of 230 active listings right now. And that's really consistent with what they do every week. Alliance was pretty much right in line with its normal pace. It added 60 listings, 28 went under contract, and they've got 338 active listings in the Alliance corridor. Previously it's been 332, and before that it was like right around right at 400. So it's doing the normal thing. The Flower Mound Capel area, they're pretty much doing the same thing, but not a lot of activity so far as the volume. They've added 30 something listings, about 35 went under contract, where the week before 31 went under contract. They've got 152 active listings in that area, where weeks before they've been the 140s, 130s, 140s, 150s, hanging the same. But for some reason, Frisco and Plano just blew the numbers out of the water so far as the number of homes they've added to the market. So maybe that's going to rotate around through the Rockwall area, Heath area, maybe come over here.
Yeah, and it kind of goes along with the theme that we've been talking about for a while too, where the kind of not the inner city, I forget what we call them, the economic centers closer to the big cities, but the good suburbs around there had so much more activity through kind of the slower times during the last year. And yeah, maybe it'll bleed back out, but that seems to prove the trend we've already seen for quite a bit.
Yeah, and it could be corporate driven too, because the Frisco Plano market is an IT corporate driven marketplace. You still have people who are moving up, moving down, retiring, changing jobs locally, but it's really driven by the IT market and corporate entities moving people in and out. Where the Alliance area, maybe the Rockwall area, they're impacted by that a little bit, but not nearly the same.
And maybe since it's kind of earlier in the year, those corporations are now, after the holidays, reorganizing their staff and adding people and that kind of thing. So that would point in that direction as well.
Yep. And so far as interest rates, they're still pretty much the same way they were the last time we reported. On average, the 30-year fixed is 6.85, 15-year fixed 6.39, 30-year jumbo 7.22. The 30-year FHA 6.38, VA is at 6.4. So that's holding steady over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think if we stay under 7, we'll be all right. But it seems like every time we creep over 7, we start getting into some trouble.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the case. Where you're going to see more buyers when it dips down toward that 6.5, 6 and 3/8, somewhere in there. That's just exciting. And then when it goes 7.01, even though it's not making $50 difference on their payment, it still feels large.
Yeah, it feels exponentially more than it really is.
Yep.
Yeah, and of course we'll see how this legislation goes and how that'll affect everything. But we'll see, and we'll keep abreast of the situation. But thanks everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next week.